So very quickly, Professor Moore is moderating this next panel, Professor of Theology at Fordham University, and serves now as its department chair, specializing in modern Christianity with a particular focus on 20th century Catholic intellectual and cultural history. The author of books, in particular, Kindred Spirits, Friendship and Resistance at the Edges of Modern Catholicism. At Fordham, she teaches courses on health and spirituality, mysticism, and modern Catholic history, women in the church and religion, and the challenges of modernity. Thank you, Professor Moore. Turning it over to you.
Thank you all. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And yes, feel free to get refreshments and we'll just get started as people return to their seats. And thank you again, Father Massingale, for that inspiring lecture. So I welcome you to our panel today on the church response to actions of the administration. We have a wonderful set of speakers, and I will just introduce them in turn. They're going to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes each, and so we should have time for Q&A, and we're going to just push back and go till 11:30, and then we'll take a break. So I'd like to just do a brief introduction to our very first speaker, Todd Scribner, who serves as the Assistant Director of Education and Outreach for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Department of Migration and Refugee Services. So thank you, Todd.
Thank you so much. And thanks to the Center for Migration Studies and to Fordham University for hosting this event and for having us here to speak with you and sometimes to you, but hopefully more with you. I want to start with two challenges, I think, and there are plenty of other challenges that we're facing as we approach this issue, but two kind of jump out in particular. First, the administration, broadly speaking. I think we were caught as a church a bit flat-footed when the administration came in. And that's not to say that we didn't expect sort of the administration to bring in some severe restrictionist elements, when it came to immigration. But the speed and the intensity with which they moved, I think, surprised many of us, and it caught us flat-footed. The closures of programs, the cutting of funding, Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities, the USCCB, really sort of caught us off guard at the rate at which it happened. But I do think that we've started to get our feet under us, and we've begun to think about how to respond to the impact, both short-term, and start to try and figure out how to counteract kind of the realities on the ground more long-term. The second challenge is that I think that this issue still remains abstract for many, and for many Catholics. We talked a little bit about polling yesterday. I think that there was something along the lines of that, 8 months ago, 64% were, opposed to sort of like some of the strong immigration, restrictions, and then it moved up to 79%. So there's a kind of a turning of the public opinion against what the administration is doing. But polling doesn't necessarily measure sort of depth of knowledge or intensity of belief on a lot of these things. I think these polls, and I'll just be honest, if I didn't work in this field, I don't think that I may have an opinion on the issue. I may be sort of frown if I read some articles, but I don't see any raids. I don't see these people being picked up on the side of the road. I live right outside Washington, D.C., so I don't see this happening on a daily basis. So it's not as sort of intentional and sort of in my face. And so I can sort of turn away from it a little bit, even if I have an opinion. So I think the challenge there is how do we get Catholics in particular engaged on this issue in a sort of an intensity that we are not currently engaged in. So in recent weeks, the Bishops' Conference have sort of undergone a lot of discussions and kind of creating a national initiative to respond to these challenges. Now, this initiative is not just an initiative of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. It can't be. It has to be a whole church initiative. And that means that we have to work with Catholic organizations across the country, Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities, local Catholic organizations that are engaged in sort of immediate engagement with migrants. And it has to be inherently local, I think. We really need people on the ground to work on these issues. And we, as sort of the national body of bishops, will certainly be there to provide resources, to provide kind of guidelines, recommendations, direct support where possible. Happy to talk to your organizations in any way that we can. and obviously urge through our Committee on Migration, the bishops as a whole, to be responsive to these issues in an intentional way. So we have a website that we're developing that will be a storing house or clearinghouse for resources. You can reach out to us whenever you want. But this has to be sort of a whole church effort that is inherently local because the impact of these issues are local. I want to talk about three buckets, for lack of a better term, that we are looking at as we develop this initiative. It's not exhaustive, and it's certainly not, not something that is just sort of a take it or leave it sort of thing. Just sort of an example of how we're approaching this. The first, would be sort of accompaniment and the importance of accompaniment. We've talked a lot about this as we've, gone through the last 24 hours or so. The impact on families and migrant families in particular is profound. The family separation, the threats of deportation, of detention, have real life impacts on migrants, their children, spouses, so on and so forth. And so we're trying to figure out ways that we can be responsive to migrant families and to their needs. So how can we provide some sort of direct assistance, either sort of accompaniment, pastoral care, maybe other forms of direct assistance if possible, to families who may have a family member that's detained and they've lost sort of income. They've lost kind of that connection because the parent that is detained is sent to another state and they don't have direct access to their family. And so their children are left without a father or without a mother, or without both. Post-deportation support. Once a family member is deported, all sorts of problems obviously emerge, in terms of just direct caregiving, kind of the unity of the family and the impact that has on local communities, basic sort of the provision of needs again. If a father's deported, for example, or a mother who may be the primary kind of worker in the house who makes the money, how do these people survive? What do they do? What mechanisms do they rely on? And so it's really incumbent upon the church on the local level and also on the national level and everywhere in between to be responsive in a way that can connect with these families. A second area or a second bucket that we're looking at is education. And really education is a question of formation, and it's a medium and a long-term effort. We've got to make sure that Catholics are aware and understand Catholic teaching on the immigration issue. And when we do that, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that, there's not an ethics of immigration as such, or an ethics of the economy, or an ethics of, of whatever issue area, the ethics of the environment. I mean, there's a comprehensive kind of understanding for kind of the moral framework that informs these issues. They don't stand alone. And so we have to approach this issue holistically in a way that we understand, how immigration and how we approach immigration and how we approach immigrants and how that translates into policy is kind of comprehensive and holistic, and doesn't just sort of stand on its own. As though you can reject the immigration ethics while embracing kind of other issues like abortion or euthanasia, in terms of how you approach these things. And we have a huge network, right? I mean, in terms of the practical matter of educating Catholics, we have a huge network to do that. We have schools, obviously Fordham is a prime example of a school that takes place, but we have primary schools and secondary schools. We have parishes, CCD classes, and we need to be kind of creative in thinking out ways that we can reach Catholics on the ground and on the local level and form them over time. And so, we need you to do this. And if you have ideas how we can do this, we're obviously open to the suggestions and to have further discussion. But the education aspect is really important. But when we talk about education, it's not merely didactic. It's not just about principles or concepts that we then apply to life. It's also it's about the whole person. And so a third bucket, I think, that can feed into these educational efforts is solidarity through witness, and opportunities to witness publicly our solidarity with migrants and their families. And so we need to find opportunities to engage in public events, to demonstrate this kind of solidarity, and to bring sort of to get the attention of Catholics so that they want to become more engaged and they want to learn more. And so there's examples of that going on. We've talked about some of these, Bishop Seitz and, March, and Bishop Weisenberger from Detroit. Later, I believe maybe in June or July, they held a procession, vigil, and it's a very public event that draws attention to this issue, and that Catholics and others of like mind or not of like mind, kind of when they see it, they get kind of curious. So it's important to kind of engage in that way. Archbishop Wensky, and he worked with the Knights of Columbus and his friends in there, to go to Alligator Alcatraz and say the rosary, in front of the entrance to it. Brings attention, and not only on the immediate ground, but it also gets media attention, and that's important because it uplifts kind of what's going on, and people see it and they get curious. Bishop Pham of San Diego, talked about him as well, the accompaniment that he's engaged in, and I believe that San Diego, the diocese there, has kind of created an initiative for accompaniment for those who are caught in in immigrant detention and sort of judicial hearings. These kinds of events draw attention, and they bring eyes to what's happening and the commitment of the church in solidarity with migrants. So these kinds of opportunities, I would love if we could have like a vigil for migrants in every single diocese across the country, over the next year, and get local media, kind of local Catholic media, involved to demonstrate that the church is on the side of migrants and their families, and to uplift these issues in ways that perhaps they're not being uplifted right now. And so we'll continue to work, with dioceses, with bishops, with you all. You can feel free to reach out to me, to Bill, to others, at MRS at any point in time. And we'll slowly, hopefully get things moving in the right direction and demonstrate our support for migrants and their families. I'll stop there, I think.
Thank you so much, Todd. We appreciate that, and we look forward to our Q&A. Next up, I am happy to introduce Don Kerwin, who's the Vice President of Advocacy, Research, and Partnerships with the Jesuit Refugee Service of the USA. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here with CMS and Fordham for organizing, and thank you for organizing this really timely gathering. I must say it's pretty meaningful for me too to be on this particular panel with these particular colleagues who I've worked with for longer than I think a lot of us would like to remember, and in all sorts of ways and capacities over the years, and many of you who are out kind of in the audience today. A little nostalgia. I was remembering past Catholic immigrant integration meetings and how we spoke about integration. So I thought I'd share that with you kind of to kick this off. I mean, we've been talking about this in three kind of ways. Is a shorthand way to speak about the integral set of needs, family needs, protection needs, community needs, belonging needs, physical and spiritual needs of immigrants. That was one way. The second way was kind of the standard academic, socioeconomic metrics, political metrics of immigrant integration. That was the second. And the third, I think, was a lot more interesting and kind of more fitting for this conference. We discussed the Catholic vision of integration, modeled by the mystical body of Christ and even by the Holy Trinity, and best described as a kind of communion centered on shared faith, beliefs, values, in an attempt to live as citizens of the kingdom in an often hostile place. I mean, it seems like that third is kind of a fitting way to be thinking about integration these days. It does seem like the word integration is a distant goal in these very unsettled times, both in the country and in the church itself. However, it should be a prominent goal, particularly when so many lives are being upended. I'll speak on a few select humanitarian, refugee, and immigration policies through the lens of Catholic social teaching. And I totally agree with Father that we need to own and can't let our own language be appropriated. That's a very important thing. And I myself feel that Catholic social teaching is a very key part of advocacy, not just about kind of us getting together and building communion among ourselves, but of advocacy. First, however, I think we need to be honest about the extremist, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee agenda that's hurting those we know and serve, as well as their families, their communities, our nation, and now our world too. The agenda is rooted in a fundamental mischaracterization of refugees and immigrants. It seeks to eviscerate U.S. immigration policies, U.S. refugee policies, U.S. asylum policies, and to weaken international law in ways that are going to undermine refugee protection around the world. The three guiding principles of Jesuit Refugee Service, where I work, are service, accompaniment, and advocacy. So it's all about action at the end of the day. And I really honestly believe Catholic teaching is crucial to that vision. Why on advocacy? Because it offers a sharp counterpoint to the ideologies, to the language, and to the policies championed by the Trump administration. The freedom or right to stay, migrate, and return is a framework that I'm thinking about and coming back to over and over again. It maintains that in every case, decisions on staying or migrating for people, which are really impossible, difficult, consequential decisions, they ought to be safe and voluntary decisions. They ought to be the fruit of a free choice, in Pope Francis's words. That should be our goal. We should be creating those kinds of conditions around the world. Catholic social teaching recognizes the responsibility of states to regulate migration, but freedom to stay also points to another state responsibility, and that's the responsibility of states to create the conditions that allow members to stay, to thrive, and to succeed in their home communities and in the communities where they find themselves. I think the right or freedom to stay was subverted pretty clearly by the administration's decision to cut nearly 90% of U.S. international humanitarian assistance funding. These are issues that we've been working steadily on for the last 8 months, and of course, Jesuit Refugee Service well before that too. These are programs that saved countless lives, and they improve the prospects of tens of millions of the world's neediest persons each year. Jesuit Refugee Service, let me just tell you our own experience. I started work there January 6th, so I've had a lot of policy successes over these last, these last 8 months. We had 9 cooperative agreements with the Department of State. At the very beginning of what's been a very, very long year so far, and it's not over, we received notice almost as soon as the administration came into power that all of these agreements were under review and were being paused. After some furious advocacy on the part of us and others, the administration said, but don't worry, there's a waiver that's going to be available for life-saving services that you're providing. So the agency went through this long process of explaining that many of our services were in fact life-saving, even in the narrow way that the administration describes life-saving, which actually doesn't reflect Catholic teaching at all. But that process, as it turned out, was just an empty process. I mean, they keep talking about fraudulent and wasteful whatever programs, but this was clearly a fraudulent process, and it was a wasteful process, and we had to go through all of that. 7 of the 9, and why it was fraudulent is because 7 of the 9 agreements were soon terminated without any decision on what was life-saving or not, without any rationale, without any explanation, and 2 others were suspended and then reinstated. Couldn't tell, the difference between any kind of rhyme or reason there. And 1 has since been expired. None of these programs were wasteful. All of them provided essential services, and they advanced the nation's global standing to boot. One program, just to give you an example, managed 21 secondary schools in Chad for Sudanese refugees mostly. These schools are not just schools, they're the hubs of life-saving services for the students and their families that are associated with these schools. And remember, the relatively modest monies for these accounts that funded programs like these had already been authorized and approved by our Congress, right? International humanitarian assistance, and this is our own study, which actually the CARA Institute did. Basically Catholics and others believe at high rates that we spend 10 to 20% of US budget on international humanitarian assistance. It's less than 1%. And these programs were, from these accounts that funded these programs, they were 12% of 1%. So do the math, 0.0012 to the world's neediest. That's what was cut. I guess, is there any hope in a situation like this? I think the answer is yes. The refugees are still there. There's always hope when there's people. There's still people in place as well trying to preserve what services and initiatives they can. And JRS is still accompanying refugees throughout the world. But let's be honest too, the losses have been very severe. Lost lives, including in JRS programs, lost potential, and lost infrastructure. People have a right or freedom to migrate when states don't safeguard the common good or provide the conditions that allow people to stay or to return home. That's core Catholic teaching. If you can't adequately feed your children, or you live in a war-torn country, or you're a young person without any prospects in your home community, you have a right to seek better conditions in your own country or elsewhere. Or Catholic teaching. Catholics don't know that. They need to know that. Moreover, Catholic teaching holds, and I think this is really important, it's not states that make those decisions, it's people that make those decisions. Consequential decisions of that kind have to be made by those most affected by them and most knowledgeable about their options. Who are those people? They're the migrants themselves. They're the migrants and their families. Catholic teaching also holds that states should create opportunities for safe and legal migration for people that have the right to migrate in these circumstances, and of course, consistent with the common good. And they should admit, welcome, and integrate displaced persons, including asylum seekers. Catholic migrant welcoming centers, shelters, border ministries, and others are still tending to the needs of those trying to reintegrate, but in this case, reintegrate into their old communities, right? And those who are seeking to stay in place as well. The fact, I think, that these ministries still exist and they're still robust is a hopeful thing. But the US asylum system has been effectively terminated in the meantime, right? The legal service networks, those supported by Clinic and others that serve undocumented asylum seekers and others, are also a major source of hope in the country and the world. The US resettlement system was a source of hope. We did the big study on it kind of towards the end of the last Trump administration. That's what the refugees said over and over again. In their darkest moments, even though they knew that it wasn't probably accessible to them, that program was a source of hope to them nonetheless. That's been basic, and it was also always viewed as central to our nation's identity. We're a country of immigrants, we're a country of refugees. But the administration paused and indefinitely suspended the program, effectively ending one of the most successful humanitarian programs in US history and decimating a public and private infrastructure built over decades, including by the Catholic Church, and particularly by the Catholic Church, I'd say. So this is an administration that's very skilled at destroying things. It's very bad at building things. It's good at walls, it's bad at bridges. And it's now prioritizing, this is what it's doing, the admission of white Afrikaners and reportedly Anglo-Saxon, far-right, free speech advocates and champions from other countries. It is actually becoming kind of a tool of white supremacists. It's clear that that's what's happening. It's also excluded tens of thousands of people already approved for admission You're not going to let me get to the hope part of it.
The hope. Oh, we need it. Yes.
It's included tens of thousands of people already approved for admission, including Afghans who had worked for the U.S. during the war in their homeland. So after this comes up over and over again on our Hill visits, after years of waiting and finally being approved for resettlement, most of these refugees who have been approved for admission to our country have to start that whole dangerous, uncertain process, heartbreaking process over again to try to secure a little bit of safety and security in the world. That's what we've done. I think the administration has also transformed the United States into an unreliable partner to its allies, to people that worked for it, to the resettlement agencies that partnered with it over so many years, and that's a tragedy as well. So why don't I do the hope during the questions and answers, because I can stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. Next up, we have Sue Weishar, who's a parish volunteer at St. Anthony of Padua Church in New Orleans. You have your clicker? Okay,
Yes,
good.
yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Hi, again, thank you, everyone that organized this conference. The speakers have been amazing, and it's so great to see so many colleagues from over the years. I'm Sue Weishar. For many years, I directed the Immigration Refugee Services Program at Catholic Charities in New Orleans. Then I worked with the Jesuit Social Research Institute for 14 years, and I've been, quote, retired since January. And I want to talk to you about how our shared parish in New Orleans is working to support our immigrant members and protect them from Trump's mass deportation agenda. And so the goals of this presentation is to show what we're doing to provide support, protection, and advocacy. And just to make sure we understand what we mean by shared parish, it's a parish defined by USC's, well, actually defined by Brett Hoover, who's here somewhere, there you are, as a parish where two or more cultural language contexts occur. So just, why don't we, I'd like to know who's a member of a shared parish. In other words, do you have a Spanish Mass or a Vietnamese Mass or a Haitian Creole Mass at your church? Okay. All right. Well, shared parishes, the latest data I have was about 30% in 2015. It's got to be a lot more now. Let me give you a little context about New Orleans. People along the border, I know every one of your parishes is a shared parish. You have Spanish Masses and English Masses. It's not quite that way in New Orleans and a lot of the country. New Orleans, the city itself is only about 7% foreign-born, 7% immigrant, including naturalized U.S. citizens, LPRs, immigrants in irregular status. I think in New York, it's what, 40%? Probably about the same in Washington, D.C. So we're way lower than the national average in a metro area that's about 8% immigrant and a state that's only about 5% immigrant. And those numbers are about double from 20 years ago, due largely to many factors, but certainly the influx of immigrants during Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. In our archdiocese, we have 104 parishes, of which 17 offer Spanish Mass. And so I'm going to talk about one of those parishes, and that's St. Anthony of Padua. And abbreviated SAP here. We've got 3 Masses in English, 1 in Spanish. The biggest Mass is in Spanish. It's about over 300 people, standing room only. And we have a small Mass in Portuguese. And it's the Spanish Mass is at a prime time, too, at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. So the city itself, it's a blue city. Everyone I've elected in office there as a Democrat. We have constitutional policing policies. Some people call that sanctuary policies. We like to say constitutional policing, where every person is treated as equal under the law. And we're in a state that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in 2024 and 2016. So who is organizing these efforts at St. Anthony of Padua? Why are we doing this, and what have we done? So let's talk about the who. The WHO is basically the Social Justice Committee at St. Anthony's, which was formed in just this year, 2025. And our main issue is immigration justice. Our pastor is essential in all these efforts I think you know, if the pastor's not on board for something that you want to do as a parishioner, it's going to be real hard to get that done. And that's the reality. And we can talk a little bit about that, but there's three other shared parishes I know in the New Orleans area, that members eager to get going on doing things to help and protect and advocate for their members, but the pastors don't want to do it for various reasons. One said, oh, well, our immigrants like to keep a low profile. And, you know, it's just the reality. What we're seeing now, imagine, again, in September, $76 billion is coming down just for ICE. So it's just unbelievable, the people's lack of awareness. And then the coordinator. And I've been coordinating these efforts. I agreed to chair the committee, and I have linkages to both communities, and I'll show you a little bit, well, how's that so? So anyway, a little bit about Social Justice Committee. Very important, we have both immigrant and non-immigrant members, because as a Social Justice Committee, and we're making plans and decisions that are going to affect our immigrant members, we have to have the input of our immigrant members, okay? And so the meetings, clearly they have to be bilingual. We meet on a regular basis, and we announce every meeting at all the masses. Everyone's invited. So the pastor, Father Augie de Armand, has been key in this whole effort. He's a pastor to all of his flock. Like Pope Francis, he's not afraid to take on the scent of his flock. He is beloved by both the English-speaking, the Spanish-speaking. He's relatively new to the parish, only 2 years. He didn't speak a lot of Spanish when he started. He's practiced it ever since, and he's giving homilies in Spanish. And here's a picture of some kids that we're going to talk about later on that our committee has advocated for. And then a little bit about myself. I'm in the front row there, proudly holding a check for $5,000 to help support our ESL program. I've been teaching ESL at the church for 15 years. And if anyone's ever taught ESL, you know you really get to know your students through this. And this is just a great way to build those encounter opportunities, a culture of encounter that Pope Francis talks about. So we have our ESL students there, we have our Loyola student volunteers for service learning, and we also have volunteers from the parish. And I want you to pay attention, if you look up here, the man with the glasses to your right here, the purple shirt, that's Abilio. Behind his shoulder, that's his nephew, Angel. And behind him in the back row, behind Angel, is Anderson. And we'll talk about these men later on. So why are we doing this? We are doing this because we are the body of Christ. And when one member suffers, the whole body suffers. And that's, I think, all the mission statement should be the mission statement of every parish in our country. We are the body of Christ. We are all equal in God's eyes. We're all children of God. And we're doing this because we know that the outrage of the American people shut down child separation at the border within days of it becoming known. And we must believe, and we do believe, that we can stop this. We can stop mass deportation too. But people have got to hear from us, and they've got to hear and see these stories. And why are we doing this? I believe also because a shared parish as a kind of a privileged place in communicating these messages. First of all, we're a mainstream parish. We've been around, well, really since 1856 in the French Quarter, but it moved to Mid-City in 1905 to serve Italian immigrants. It's a Dominican church. And we have natural linkages both to our immigrant and non-immigrant parishioners, right? Because we're a shared parish. And because we're a Catholic parish that's over half white, we have many people on the other side of the immigration debate. Many of our members voted for Trump. I would say probably at least half. And because we are a Catholic church, it means Catholic Church, we are a respected messenger for the moral message to end mass deportation. So that's who we are and why we're doing it. So what are we doing? We have 3 areas that we've been working on. I'm calling this protection, support, and advocacy, sort of the short term, middle term, and long term that Father Brian talked about. But the first thing we thought about, we've got to protect our members from ICE coming to church, right? That was announced immediately after the Trump administration took office. And so we developed a plan. So with this, there's basically 2 aspects: education, know your rights, although I don't know why I'm thinking some of those workshops are pretty obsolete at this point. Just a brief aside, one of our members, all the workshops about worksite raids don't run, right? So one of our members was at a worksite along the Gulf Coast, 80 immigrants there, all undocumented. ICE came. He ran like hell, and he ran into town, and he and 5 other immigrants ended up in a small business and run by white working class people, and they hid the immigrants in the bathroom for an hour. Yeah, just that was their natural response. But anyway, so 50 people ran, and they're here to tell of it, and 30 people were I don't know if they ran or not, but 30 people were arrested. So anyway, education, know your rights flyers. We haven't had a great turnout for the know your rights. I'm not sure why, but we have all the information in the back of the church. And then safety and solidarity plans. So we have protocols for 3 scenarios that I can send you all. I won't go into too much detail right now, but basically, what do we do if ICE enters the church, which is just a frightening thought. All these kids and elderly people, and what do we do if ICE waits outside the church, more likely trying to grab people going home? And what do we do if ICE shows up at an immigrant parishioner's job site? So we developed what we call the Solidarity Rapid Response Team and a protocol. And the protocol, we worked it through, and basically the priest in charge of Mass counsels the parishioners to remain calm, and then speaks with ICE, asks them to leave. And then other people text or call the Parish Solidarity Response Team, and they show up. We come to church. We've got the signs in our trunks. We come to church to pray, protest, and film, and we call the media. What do we do if ICE is at a parishioner's workplace? We got a hotline we went around and around how to do this. We thought, well, maybe we'll be the ones that will respond to a hotline. And we go, oh, no. We got a hotline number, $500 a year. Oh, my goodness. I got to get going. All right. Rapid response. And then we come to the site and we pray and protest. Haven't had to use it yet. Thank God. Hope we never do. We have power of attorney workshops, but this is something we did during this organizing. We're realizing people need money for attorneys, so let's do a fundraiser. So we had this beautiful pancake breakfast. We talked about table fellowship, and here we have, it was announced at all the masses after Spanish Mass and after the 11 o'clock English Mass, and we have Anglo parishioners serving our immigrant parishioners. It was delicious. Well run. We have a committee at church that does these kind of activities. It's the first time we did it just for our immigrant parishioners. This auditorium area was eventually filled. In the back, there's face painting. In front, there's music. There's Walter. He was playing music. It was very joyful. So what's important when you bring people together? Food and joy. And there's our parish president, the big guy there, and he's 100% on board. And it was hot and humid because they had to cook outside. Another area of support was a Katrina prayer service for immigrants, the 20th anniversary of Katrina. We had to do something because this is the time of year when everyone remembers, oh yeah, the city got saved by immigrants. Okay, and here's one. We have pictures of immigrant workers. This is a woman right here. She's on our committee. 150,000 homes were destroyed. At the height of the reconstruction effort, half of the workers were Latino, half of them were undocumented. Everybody knows that undocumented were essential. Here's the prayer service in front of our church. 3 homeowners spoke to thank them. 3 faith leaders spoke to bring up what our faith says about immigration. And then we had 3 immigrants speak, but people can't show their faces now. So we had to pre-record and play it into the microphone. How sad. How sad that last year they could have spoken at a public event and now people can't show their faces. And so, and we have, it's a homeowner here I want to just mention briefly. She is African-American. Her African-American church was rebuilt by immigrants, and she mentioned how the American community has seen the damage that separating children during slavery and incarceration did, the harm to children, and now we're seeing this with mass deportation, the harm to families when you separate loving parents from their children. So, amidst of all of this, all of a sudden, three of our immigrant parishioners are detained, and their cousin. Two of the guys in that picture that I showed you were detained, and one already been deported, and one's being held in federal prison because he re-entered 11 years ago and he's serving federal time. Unbelievable. So these two gentlemen, Abner, both salt of the earth. Abner, they're both here 20 years, no crimes, no legal criminal issues whatsoever, small U.S. citizen children. Abner, in the blue shirt, started a prayer group at our church in 2008, bringing together migrants. It's packed Tuesday nights. People come to pray and learn their faith. Abner is his cousin. So we advocated for them, and this is everything we did. Letter to the editor, beautiful from our pastor, letters of support, letter to campaign. And one thing we really had to do as a parish was get letters of support for a cancellation of removal. Are you familiar with that process? But anyway, you have to show that you have links to the community, and we showed that Abner had a link to our church, and we spoke about we are the body of Christ. Without him, we are suffering. So what happened? And then I just want to show this, and I'll sit down. But this is something that we'd been wanting to do, and this was to show the face of what happens when you tear apart parents from their children. And we got the Times-Picayune, the newspaper of record for the state. It's really called the Advocate. So this was seen all over the state. And I'll just go through the article. There's a paywall. Why don't we Google it? They came to build New Orleans, and then it'll come up. Sorry. Anyway, we had this article in the newspaper. It went out. You'll see the pictures of the children. We made sure we had the pictures taken. They're U.S. citizen children. We had them taken in the church with the pastor in front of the altar, praying to the statue of Mary. How Catholic can you get? Okay. And we were trying to show these are people that, sorry, we'll have to figure out this later. I'll have you, Google this. I'll just put it down for you to Google yourself. They came to build New Orleans, and now they are, the ICE is trying to deport them. But anyway, so we had these pictures, and out of this came a pro-life Catholic Republican reached out to us and said, I want to work with you to try and get our Republican Congressman, Steve Scalise, in on this issue. And I'll talk about that later. Todd.
Thank you so much, Sue, for those stories. Thank you. Our final speaker we have with us is Sister Sally Duffy, a founding board member and chair of the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to CMS, Fordham University. Thank you to the panel. Thank you. It was incredibly touching, so thank you. And thank you to all of you. I put this slide up because we often do not ask people about their image of God. And there are studies that have been done that indicate how people respond in terms of their relationship to God has some correlation with action on behalf of justice. And I think it's something that we need to, as people of faith, be a little more intentional, in terms of asking, do you perceive your God as unconditional, or do you perceive your God as conditional, that you need to earn, you need to merit love? And is God remote, a distant, a judge, a master? a king? Or is God relational, a mother in the world, a friend? We've already heard a lot about Catholic social teaching and intersectionality. So thank you for the preview, because it is critically important that we focus on the issue of human trafficking in terms of all the conditions and the systems, but they need to be looked at in terms of intersectionality, because it has impacts, on housing, health. People in poverty become more vulnerable. So we need to stop creating the conditions that treat people like commodities. Therefore, they become vulnerable to labor and sex trafficking. We also need to eliminate the power differential between men and women. We need to denounce the objectification and denigration of women and girls. And we need to give them their proper place in society and in our church. And we ensure that laws and policies promote and protect the dignity and rights of women, girls, and all who are oppressed and marginalized. We also have a dominant economic system that is not informed by Catholic social teaching. And we're never taught about that. We just accept unfettered capitalism like it's a good thing. We accept neoliberal development in trickle-down economics like it's good for everybody. And every study out there proves that it is not. It creates the conditions and the systems for trafficking. It creates a culture of violence and commodification, and it also decreases necessary social services funding, which we are currently seeing right now. We don't have long-term support for people who have experienced trafficking. It's all raise your own money. We also, as you all know, by denouncing our immigration policies, we push people into the shadows more and more. We also make them more and more vulnerable to human trafficking, because we're basically sending a message: they don't count. We dehumanize them. And so, gosh, if they're a commodity, let's just use it. We do that in our society and in our church. There are ways of advocating. Currently, 3 bills that are critically important: the reauthorization of the Trafficking Protection Act. There's also the Kids Online Security Act, which is also endorsed by the USCCB, so thank you. And then the federal expungement and vacatur. And we're also not good at screening unaccompanied children for trafficking, nor are we good at where we place those children, and have we carefully and thoroughly screened for trafficking. The Human Trafficking Institute says that 72% of those that are trafficked in the United States are immigrants. It makes sense, doesn't it? Labor and sex. And can we use trauma-informed assessment tools to screen more for trafficking? Because there is the eligibility for T visa. There's no backlogs with the T visa. But we also need to be advocating to keep the T visa. Clinic, Catholic Legal Immigration Network, has T-Visa, frequently asked questions. The Alliance to End Human Trafficking has an excellent migration, it is forced migration and human trafficking video that I recommend to all of you. The Vatican has their pastoral orientations on human trafficking. We need to understand the causes, the commodification, and the exploitation that is taking place. This is a 236 billion illegal profit business. Trafficking involves in the United States force, fraud, or coercion. That can happen in many, many ways. Drugs can be a way of doing it. Threats to family can be a way of doing it. And there is a difference between smuggling and trafficking. We pay a lot of attention to the supply side. Not a lot of attention is paid to the demand side. Candidly, all of us in this room are part of the demand side, because we're feeding some corporations and systems out there that are engaged in trafficking. We're largely unaware of how we're participating in that. And then, I don't know about your neighborhoods, but my neighborhood, people talk about the prostitution. They talk about the prostitutes, but there's never any discussion about the demand side. The Alliance to End Human Trafficking has a statement of support for the equality model that also includes restorative justice. And we have that because there are many places where they are trying to legalize prostitution, and we firmly are opposed to that because of God-given dignity. We have a reluctance to educate about the reality of human trafficking, and we need to figure out ways to educate and include this, and we're working on this at the Alliance to End Trafficking, on trying to get that incorporated into Virtus or Safe Parish and Safe Schools training. The USCCB, thank you, Bill, Todd. There is also an excellent video on the USCCB website about human trafficking and how to address the root causes. There's difficulty with identifying and reporting. Police investigations are long and difficult. All we have to do is look at our country right now and some of the high-profile cases that we've had experience. And unfortunately, they can take decades before we see people being held accountable. Our business models hide the crime well. And cryptocurrency does not help that. Often human trafficking is hidden within the labyrinth of our supply chain. And I imagine many of us in this room are connected with organizations that have investments. In any ways we can work with ICCR and other groups out there to collectively leverage our investments are critical. As I said, there's a difference between trafficking and smuggling. Unfortunately, a lot of times there are some smugglers or coyotes who become involved in trafficking. They get the person to the United States, but they know where the family members are and they threaten. There's a lack of cooperation on state actors. And we don't support well victims of human trafficking with evidence-based practices and special training and certification in trauma-informed care. And lastly, we always need to promote the reintegration of victims of human trafficking so that they can become thrivers and achieve the goals that they have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Sally. And one more round of applause for Todd, Don, Sue, and Sister Sally. Thank you for your wonderful remarks. We have just 5 minutes, and so I'd like to open it up if there is. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions or comments for any of the panelists. Yes, back there, and then right there. Back there, go ahead. You, go ahead, back there. You, yes, you standing.
Good morning, and thank you for your time with us. Specifically to a point that Mr. Kerwin made regarding the politics that we're living through right now. Are there any specific ways that the average American citizen can engage in kind of addressing the root causes of illegal immigration? You know, how do you engage certain crises that are going on overseas? What type of, how can I put this? What type of engagement should there be? You know, is it enough to call your representatives? Is it enough to go to protests regarding, you know, some conflicts in some far-flung region of the world, or can we do something more? Thank you.
I mean, two quick things that we've been active on is first of all, those programs have to come back. You know, you can't in 2 months end $60 billion worth of humanitarian programs and expect that there's not going to be massive displacement, loss of lives, loss of possibilities and the like. So that's an obvious thing to do. And then the second is, you know, kind of we're in a state of exception now in our country. You know, we're not in normal times, that's for sure. In normal times, you might take a concept like the right to stay and you say that it applies to people both in their home countries and in receiving states. And you'd look in who's here in the United States that ought to stay. And it'd be long-term residents, it'd be persons with legal immigration status on humanitarian grounds, it would be asylees and asylum seekers. And the response to all 3 of those populations ought to be a legalization program. It definitely should, and we have to talk about that again. And instead, what do we have? This ridiculous mass deportation program that includes an expanded privatized detention system that's going to have the capacity to detain more than 1 million people a year before too long. It includes placing asylum seekers in removal proceedings, who are in removal proceedings and expedited removal, and then just fast track removing them. And that it includes enforcement strategies that violate religious liberty. There's no doubt about any of those issues. So that you have plenty to advocate on.
Thank you so much. We have 1 question there. This will probably have to be our last question before we break for lunch.
Hi, I want to ask you, sister. You mentioned the intersectionality of neoliberalism. I want to ask, from your perspective, do you feel like a lot of the xenophobia and they're capitalizing on the anger of the middle class as a whole in this country, in the way that we've been disenfranchised over the last 40 years, to point the blame at immigrants or LGBT, whatever of the day, whatever the marginalized group is. And it seems like the Catholic culture as a whole, at least in the United States, I don't know, around the world, seems fearful to point to the economic root cause, that's like one of the main drivers of against human dignity across the board. Is there, I guess in your opinion, is there room how can we kind of influence that to influence our peers and the culture to get people to understand that we don't need to be divided by race and ethnicity and religion when there's essentially a class war that is completely not allowed to be spoken about, I guess. Thank you.
I agree with everything you said. And I think you said it well. And I would recommend a book by Anthony Annette on catonomics, which clearly demonstrates, how unfettered capitalism is hurting our country and hurting our people. And it's very different than a time when we had a thrust to social democracy like 40, 50 years ago. And clearly the research is there. And so, yes, and all we have to do is look at the pay ranges of CEOs versus other workers. We've lost a lot of ground in terms of moving people to equality by focusing on scarcity rather than on abundance, which our gospel teaches us to. I could say much more, but I'll leave it at that. But I do recommend that book to you. Yeah.
We will end there. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom to the panelists. The excellent questions, and we will get further instructions or.
Terrific, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.